back on air.
Welcome to Once Upon a Time in the Ashes, the podcast that celebrates the English and Australian cricketers who played in only one Ashes test. Arnie Sidebottom, Jonathan Agnew, Murray Bennett and Dave Gilbert were our guests as we dissected the 1985 Ashes in England. Catch up with those episodes on your podcast platform of choice right now. And the odyssey continues as we move into the late 80s and early 90s of Ashes cricket. Keep your eyes peeled and your ears to the ground for incoming episodes with Greg Campbell, John Stevenson, Steve Watkin and Joe Angel. But before we leave the mid-80s behind, we're going to broaden and enhance our cricketing palates with a special episode celebrating the women's game, specifically the 1984-85 Jubilee series between Australia and England, the only 5-test series in the history of the women's game. Our guides for this jamboree of the Jubilee are Anne Mitchell, the manager of the Australian women's cricket team between 1976 and 1988, and, of course, two one Ashes Test wonders who played their only test against England in that series, Annette Fellows of South Australia and Karen Reid of Western Australia. Of course, it wasn't called the Ashes back then.
I didn't think of it as the Ashes because it wasn't called it back then.
No, it wasn't referred to the Ashes. It was Australia versus Blondes.
Yeah. Annette Fellows and Karen Reid there. What are Karen's first memories of the Ashes?
When Australia would tour England and we'd get the radio broadcast. I had this little radio and I'd put it, Mum would be saying, you've got to be in bed, you've got to be at school tomorrow. And I'd have the radio under my pillow just listening to it. So that's how I thought, I wanted to listen to it and hear what was happening. I think there was the first test match here in Perth in 72. I think it might have been Australia-England at the Wacker. First time we'd hosted a test match. I remember being there as a kid sitting on the boundary line because those days they just had the boundary line. They allowed all the kids to sit right on the grass. And I think someone like Greg Chappell got a ton and we all ran onto the field. So some security guard came out and said, you lot get off. And we very quickly scooted back off.
And those early Ashes memories fueled her dreams to play cricket for Australia.
Oh, yeah, that was one of the things I definitely wanted. I always said I was going to play for Australia, especially growing up as a kid. I mean, I didn't know women could play cricket, so saying you're going to play for Australia was a massive pipe dream. There was a field which had 2 cricket wickets, but girls weren't allowed to even step foot on the field. We had to go and play softball. One day they relented, I think, through my perseverance, and I had one game playing against the boys. I think I took 3 wickets and went over, and that was it. I got banished back to softball. I wasn't allowed on the oval again. But even 12 months before the World Cup, my dad passed away suddenly, and he was, he'd been my coach and mentor, and that was really quite challenging in a sense of we had lost him. And I remember waking up the next morning, I went out to find Mum, and I said, oh, it's okay, the World Cup's coming up, I'll make that Australian team. And I sort of walked away from that statement and thought, oh my God. Anyway, what was a surprise when we did actually get to the World Cup in New Zealand was that the English players just said to the Australian captain, Sharon Treadray, why'd you bring a bunch of kids with you? Because they were all probably 30 to mid-30s odd, and we've got this whole 5 or 6 of us who are only 22, So they were really quite amazed that we had the gall to be so optimistic that we could get success with such a young team.
And the nerves were certainly jangling towards the end of that World Cup final against England, February 1982 in Christchurch.
But then came the run chase and we were in all sorts of trouble. We'd lost a couple of really early wickets and I think I was batting at 4, so I was out there really early. And as a 20-year-old, and I was just petrified. I was thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do here? We're going to lose, something doesn't happen. And I think Sharon Treadray was out there with me at one point. And I was just thinking, well, we've got to start pushing the runs. And I could hear my dad's coaching voice in the back of my head just saying, the ball's there to hit it. Just hit it. Just play your shots and play your game. And I sort of, initially I felt like I had lead feet at the crease because of the dire situation we're in. You're just too scared to hit a ball and make a run or whatever. And I just started then to ease up, started to play some shots. And I think I was going quite well, actually. And I went to hit up over the infield, but there's a slight breeze and the ball just held up. And I remember Jan Southgate running backwards and she took a really fantastic catch. And I was running down the other end and Sharon Treadray was there and she said, it's all right, it was the right shot. It was just a bit unlucky. It just didn't get, and you need a final and you're still needing God knows how many runs, and she's giving you praise. I thought, all right. I'd probably say it's probably one of my nervous games I've ever played through, and then had to sit through at the end. You'd rather be out there. But it was a really great game, and England took it up to us. But the uniqueness about that Australian team, that everyone had a role to play, and it was so hard to actually get into final 11. Everyone stood up. The team was in trouble. Someone else would stand up, and that's what I can remember from it. Like, it was just quite an extraordinary performance.
Australia managed to get over the line, winning by 3 wickets with only 6 balls remaining. What was the winning moment like?
Oh, just unbelievable. We were just jumping up and down, hugging each other, couldn't wait to get out. I think it was, sometimes, and you hear it quite often in sport, just this massive sense of relief, that you've done it. Thank God for that. It could have gone the other way and then it would have been miserable, but we were ecstatic.
Anne Mitchell was the manager of the women's side for that World Cup win, and there were some hairy moments along the way, and not just on the field.
We once had, when I took the 82 team to New Zealand, we had a fire in the hotel at Christchurch. Anyway, so fire alarm goes off, I think we got calls to our rooms as well to check that we'd heard it and that we were moving. So I just grabbed, I think I had all their passports and grabbed a tracksuit on or something or other and dashed out to see that they were all down in the street. So I get down and about 3 or 4 of them weren't there. And one of them was Rayleigh Thompson. I thought, where the hell is Rayleigh? She didn't get the call till late, and she ended up coming down the steps at the back of the hotel with a group from England. So somehow she'd worked out something was going on. And she walked down with her tracksuit on over her pyjamas and because this was very early in the morning, and her kit bag. I said she was the only one that managed to grab or even thought to grab her kit bag. But, of course, I was worried for about 20 minutes until she was discovered.
And how did Anne come to be in this role in the first place?
The manager, and still when I took on the role, was the sole support staff for the Australian women's cricket team. You did everything, like organised practices, and you didn't have a coach, you didn't have a physio, looked after the medical side, often running off to take someone to hospital or a physio or whatever. It was 1977 that I took over, and what had happened, Lorna Thomas had held the position for probably 10 years before me. She was an MBE, and then she did her last tour in 76. Now, I, meanwhile, had been cutting my teeth on playing for New South Wales. I played for the Australian team in 1975. From there on, I could see I was going to be a fringe player and that I'd be lucky to get in. I was a fast bowler, and people like Sharon Treadray and Rayleigh Thompson were ahead of me. So I thought, how can I hang around this game? When the opportunity came up, I thought, all right, I'm going for it. Now, they were a little bit dubious about it. I had one of the board members from the Australian Women's Cricket Council take me aside and say, and they're a bit worried that you're the same age as some of the players, and will they respect you and so on. I think I was about 32 at the time. And I said, yes, I believe I can do it and I want to do it, I don't foresee any problems that way. Lorna gave me a notebook and a pen and said, just keep that in your handbag because you've got to keep notes on everything. That was my only induction, and off I went.
There hadn't been a series against the Poms since 1976, a 3-match drawn series, so the 1984 to 85 series was eagerly anticipated.
The most important thing about it was the historic nature of it. It was called the Jubilee series here, commemorating, as I say, 50 years since the first women's test match. We created a Peden Archdale trophy for play between us. Now, I was thinking about it, and I have no idea where that trophy is now, but that was created for this series in particular. It was the first 5 test series we'd had to go to every major cricketing state in Australia. Margaret Peden had died just a few years before the first test, but Betty Archdale, the England captain, was there to toss the coin. So that was a wonderful mark. I think the historic nature of it and the functions we held around it were focusing on that. That first test was dedicated to Margaret Peden. The fourth test in New South Wales was dedicated to Ruth Preddy, who was involved in setting up the International Women's Cricket Council and had helped finance the first 1934 test when England came out to Australia. So those two special tests dedicated to those special women made it something very particular. I think in the West, that first, once we got there, as I say, we were looking forward to this huge series, but there'd been no real preparation as far as I can remember. It was just in the nets beforehand. Then we got out in the ground and my God, we had Avril Starling and Jan Southgate and people playing, and that seemed to be at the top of the game. They had a few warm-up matches.
With the Jubilee series starting in Perth, those warm-up games were against a WA side led by Karen Reid.
Yeah, I was the captain of WA when we were playing them. We actually beat them 2-1, and had it not been for a last ball, not misfield, but placement, we probably should have actually gone 3-0. We played exceptionally well there against England. I know they'd just arrived and everything, but they were they wanted their players in form. The other side of it, Western Australia, our team, we brought in some of the younger players as well. So our performance was fantastic.
But despite this success, Karen had to bide her time to earn her call-up for the series.
The women's test match, 84-85, which started here in Perth, obviously went down there, wasn't selected, and watched that.
And Karen was probably as tense in the stands as Anne Mitchell was behind the scenes. England was in the ascendancy during that first test, which left Australia trying to hang on for the draw.
Once it got so close at the end, where it came down to, when none of us were sure, it came down to, do they finish at 5:30 or do they play out a number of overs? Now, all I remember is running up and down the steps of the Wackett ground, trying to find someone, an expert who could tell me this. In the end, the umpires called it at 5:30, but that saved us. We just were in a mess and only had so many runs up our sleeve, to get, but we'd run out of batters to do it.
And that wasn't the only problem facing Anne Mitchell. There was also the injury to captain and star player Sharon Tredrea.
Anyway, a traumatic time because the captain's injury. I think it was her Achilles heel. Rayleigh Thompson wasn't keen to take it on, but she did because they told her she was the most experienced senior player. She's not a person who really likes the leadership role like that for some reason, and yet she's got a tremendous brain. Strategy of the game is something she's really interested in, but I think she thought the young ones and those that were a bit more popular or something might have been better. But on this particular occasion, I know she was reluctant, but then she took it on with some enthusiasm. By this stage in her career, she was in her 30s, so she was sensing that, this was the end. But then she took on the challenge. It was fantastic. And she spoke to Peter Karlstein. We had meetings. We talked about strategies and things like that. And she was prepared to go on to Adelaide.
Yes, it was onwards to Adelaide for the second test.
We only had a couple of changes in the team because of Sharon's injury. I think Karen Price was brought into the team, and then Annette Fellows was brought in because she was from South Australia and would know the oval there well.
As I was just talking to a friend of mine, the most exciting thing was, number one, I got to play at Adelaide Oval. Had my name up on we all did, but for me, the name up on the old scoreboard, the heritage listed scoreboard, that was just as exciting as anything, really. But it was more about that the opportunities to play on those iconic kind of grounds, I suppose.
And when we got to Adelaide, it started well. Rayleigh did not win a toss during the series. She did not win a toss. Jan Southgate won it every time, and Jan usually chose to bat. So Jan batted and they were all out for 91. So we all thought, new captain and everything, and we're on the way. And then our openers did well. I think Denise Emerson scored a century, opening up with Peter Vercoe. They were a key opening pair for us during this series. But the middle order failed and we still had a chance. But here was a case where I was out with someone who was injured, and I can't remember who it was now. And we came back to find that our whole batting side had collapsed. You know, the bowlers were trying to hang on at the end. But England had managed to win, I think it was by 5 runs. And they invited us into the their dressing room at the end to have a drink. And I don't think our team were very happy about it, actually.
The general feeling was one of devastation, maybe, but I think we believed we should have won it, and to come away with only that, I think everyone was a bit down as such. And that's probably why the selectors had to make some decisions about the team, because it was a game that should have been won, and we lost. I do remember that there was that feeling of one that got away sort of thing.
Annette made a credible 25 in the first innings, but when she was out for a duck in the second, Australia was reeling at 6 for 5, or 5 for 6 in Australian parlance. Either way, a calamitous start, which made the target of 126 seem a long, long way away. But a battling effort by the lower middle order, including 51 from Karen Price and 28 from 123 deliveries from Lynne Fulston, almost saw Australia home.
Lynne Fulston, or Lefty, as she was called, she was very determined. That's why she would have done well in that situation. She was a very determined cricketer. She was no way were they going to beat her. She would have loved that situation. She was one of the most determined cricketers I think I've met. She was fantastic. She wouldn't let you get away with, if there was a game to be won or saved, she'd be doing it.
But it was England who secured victory, and the mood in the Australian camp was not great as the selectors wielded the axe. Annette being one of the players surplus to requirements for the third test.
The other interesting thing about that was it was on Christmas Eve. Players were dropped. The selectors got the axe to the team, and I think we had 5 changes for the third test. And I had a team of girls. I'd been out and bought them some fun things for Christmas, but they were not in the least interested. They were just casting slander on the selectors. Oh dear, it was a horrible time.
After a drawn game in the third test at Brisbane, Australia were in a hole, 1 down with 2 to play.
Then we went to Gosford for the 4th test. Now, Gosford's a lovely country area of New South Wales, but they had to win this one, the Aussies, because England were 1 up from Adelaide. They'd had the 2 draws. They just had to win going into the last one, or it would have put too much pressure. What my memory of this one is that Chris Matthews injured herself, she's the wicketkeeper, while they were warming up. So I was dashing her off to a hospital or somewhere to get that attended to. We got back in time for Chris to take the field, obviously. We got going and did fairly well. And really in this game, this is where her decisions to declare overnight and so on pushed England into having to do something, you know. That I praise her for, because some of the other captains at the time were just happy to see out a draw or something, but Riley was determined to win it. It was the first Australian win over England in 33 years. Everyone was really happy. I've seen a picture of the team coming off, and I could see Chris Matthews and all those in the field jumping up and down. They were thrilled. And it took them in this very positive way into the final test.
Onwards to the final test, the decider, and it was time for Karen Reid to enter the fray.
The only sort of issue that I had really was, well, I was a little bit rusty because the grade competition had stopped over summer, so there was no competitive cricket that I was playing. They were picking the test teams from grade cricket then, because there wasn't a national series before it. So it was all just who was in form at the time. And that's the era that I went through. If you weren't getting runs or weren't taking wickets, you were just dropped. And you weren't dropped totally out of it, but you had to then come back. I mean, that was typical of World Cup selections. Like, if you failed once, you're gone. Like, don't fail. It was scary, but it was motivating. So, right, yes, I am here to do a job, and they want you in the team, but you've got to show that you deserve to be in the team. So they didn't mess around with it much. And I think that was the same call that they're putting on the test teams. Quite a lot of players played through that series. And I was quite shocked because I thought, well, they're not going to pull me back in now, and they did. And I was obviously thrilled to get the opportunity, pack your bags and get over there.
This fifth and final test was held in Bendigo at the Queen Elizabeth Oval, a rather fitting venue for this Jubilee series.
Yeah, sort of, I guess, typical sort of little country grounds that they do have sometimes. If I can recall it, there's a really nice old stand and picket fence. And, the local Bendigo community got out and came along and did support it. And it was, it was a good treat for them, I think, to see some first-class cricket and for us to be able to play in front of probably a little bit bigger crowd than had been hanging around for some time.
They batted first and scored 196. That was the innings where Rayleigh starred with the ball. This particular series saw Rayleigh drop a little bit her speed, but use more of her wile in becoming a medium pacer and doing more with the ball. When she first opened for Australia with Sharon Tregear, they were the most feared pace attack in the world for their speed and their accuracy and so on. But Rayleigh in this one, as I say, in her 30s, she's using more of her wiles and so on to get wickets. And she certainly did it in that first innings where they took 5 wickets. So everything's going along all right.
Yeah, the whole game was very tight, very close, as it always is. I think by that time as well, both teams had a good measure across each other about strengths and weaknesses and things, and that certainly does make a difference.
But a major spanner was about to be dropped into the Australia works.
We were going along all right. It was seesawing a bit between the two teams, but was it the second last night or the day 3 was where this illness struck the crew? Well, this is where I came into action again as manager. So I forget who came to me first, but someone was ill. So what I did was, always the girls were room 2 in a room, was send the one who was well up to my room. And that was Rayleigh, actually. She's complained about it since, I remember now. So she was sent to my room and I stayed down with the sick person. But then, because everyone knew that was the manager's room, when the others got sick, they were all coming knocking on Rayleigh's door in the middle of the night saying, oh, such and such is vomiting, you have to come and do something. So she said she got no sleep. The next day we did feel a bit wiped out. And the person who I found helped to calm it all was Peter Carlstein. I went into the dressing room and he was talking to people like Jill Kinnear and Karen Reid and others who had to bat. He was talking calmly to them. Well, this is the situation. We're just going to have to do our best and get through it as best we can. But it was an outstanding time, and anyone who took part in that test will remember, I think one of the umpires got the illness. It was obviously food poisoning. And a couple of the England girls did too. But it just seemed to hit us really strong. Sometimes we ate together and had team dinners. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we just let people go with their friends or something and have dinner and just come back, and we'd have a team meeting when they got back. But I think those people must have all eaten at the same place. But certainly it wasn't all of us. But it was a memorable day. Lynne Larson was the other one who couldn't field. There again, so Rayleigh had to do a lot of the bowling, a couple of the people, because these people couldn't get on the field. And when it came to the batting, they just had to hold up their end and do as best they could and not take any risky runs.
Yeah, I was trying to, I think it was, I don't know if we got food poisoning. It might have gone out somewhere and just food poisoning. Some of us got crook. And the funny side of that was where we were staying was across the road. So we could just pick up our bags and walk across. So when we were feeling a little bit better, like it was just before lunch, I think, on whatever day it was, chucked on the trackie and wandered across the road. And the guy says, "A ticket." And we went, "No, we're playing." "No, you need a ticket to get into the game." I said, "No, but we're in the Australian team." And he wouldn't let us in. It was just quite hilarious. And in the end, we said, "Look, this is our bag and everything." He just didn't, I don't know, just didn't seem to believe us. But anyway, eventually got in, but he wasn't going to let us in. So I don't know how many were sick. I know definitely it was 2 of us came. Might have been 3, I think, got quite crook. But I just remember feeling really crook in the morning, then sort of getting to the game. It felt just awful. And, the only reason, like going across to the ground, I thought, well, we better get there. They're going to, they're going to be short. Got through probably the worst of it, but whatever it was, had taken the stuffing out of us.
Karen was there in the middle when the series, the Ashes, if I may, were won. But did she hit the winning runs?
And I reckon I possibly did hit the winning runs, because I thought this is a big irony that I haven't been here, and why should I have the honour of getting these runs, That ran through my head, so I probably suspect, yes, I maybe did hit the winning run after all that 5 test matches. And, I just do remember it had been high pressure, that test, and it was just, again, just one of those, what a relief. Done it, got the Ashes, won.
But following the sickness bug, the celebrations were slightly muted.
I think the team, because it was so washed out, I really can't remember us celebrating very much at that time. We were probably just packing up and getting people back to beds and things like that, actually.
After the game, and I just had a champagne. I was like, "Oh my God, it's knocked me out." Laid down, wet towel on my head.
For the record, Australia won that 5th test by 7 wickets, chasing down their target of 116 in 50 overs. Jill Kinnear followed up her century in the first innings with 42 in the second, but when she was run out, it was down to Karen and Lindsay Reeler to see Australia home. And yes, Karen did hit those match and series winning runs. How does Karen look back on the series and that era of women's cricket in general?
Oh, look, it was just amazing, really. Yeah, the fact that there was no coverage or anything, and no one was a household name. But the reality is you're still playing cricket for your country, and you're playing cricket against other countries in different formats, test matches and the one-dayers. And I think anyone who plays or represents Australia in whatever form, you've got to say, well, they're at the peak of their game. It should be recognised. And I think I certainly feel that during all of that period of time, that so many people continued to work hard for women's cricket, and people had not done the hard yards that may not have continued to build and get the foundation. So I'm really proud to have had the opportunity and to have represented Australia. It's nice when it is recognised, because a lot of people nowadays seem to think, well, women's cricket's just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. And it hasn't. It's got a history. It's got a great history. It's got a grand history. And, this conversation here is a part of that history. And it needs to get out there to say the foundations of what was built upon. And there have been some great Ashes series, and there have been magnificent World Cups. Women hosted, organised and sorted out the first World Cup. It was Rachel Hayhoe Flint, who, English great, who got that set up, So women in cricket have done amazing things for the game. Just hope that continues, maybe through history, to be recognised and promoted. In Western Australia, we've just recently, albeit 2 years later because of COVID, but we've just celebrated the 90th anniversary of women's cricket in Western Australia. And when you look back at the pioneers of the game who started it, and they went through a world war where everything was stopped and they'd get some momentum, then they lost time in the World War, and then they had to start up again. And all these stories about women in cricket are amazing. And it's got, as I said, it's got an amazing history, a colourful history, a history rich in amazing players and calibre of the players, we talk about Sharon Treadway, Rayleigh Thompson. They're really quick bowlers, really quicker than today's. I seriously go watch, some of the bowlers today. I think we're quicker, and we need to make sure that continues to be a legacy of cricket. I was inducted into the WA Gallery of Greats at the WACA. I was only the second woman to be inducted into that. The first woman was the founder of the competition, Ollie Leslie, who was responsible at the beginning for getting, women's cricket up and running in Western Australia. So I was the only second female to go into there. So that was a really great honour to have, because I guess I spread myself right across, really, on the field and off the field. I did a lot of work, probably, and to be quite honest, at the end of the day, if there was one thing I may do different, was probably not do as much as I did off the field. But it was the sign of the times, so if you don't keep building the foundations here, the next generation of kids may not have a team to play for. And so I probably sacrificed some of my own personal play. I wasn't selfish in a sense. I sort of viewed the whole of cricket as opposed to just my individual pathway.
And how does Annette Fellows look back, especially given the increased media attention and coverage that the women's game is given today?
You kind of smile sometimes and think, I wish we had that sort of thing. There's no bitterness. I think it's just great that it's out there. I look back on, I just had a great time. Cricket was, and because I was not only a player, but I did basically everything, I coached and worked in administration and was a selector in the state and all those, and worked with kids at schools and stuff. It just was a really big part of my life from 16 to 47, I think it was, or even longer than that. So, yeah, it was a big part of my life and made lots of friends and had great times. And, the game itself, I think I achieved as much as I could have achieved at that time. So, yeah. And even now I still love the game and, go and watch men and women so as much as I can. So it's been a really big part of my life and I've really enjoyed every minute of it. I wouldn't take anything back that I did back then or wish I'd done anything more. I mean, you can always wish, I suppose, but I just loved it.
And some long overdue recognition has been forthcoming for Annette and Karen.
I don't know if you know Christina Matthews, she's currently CEO of the WACA. At this 90th anniversary thing, she came along and she when the Australian players now get their baggy green, that it's given to them in a bag, so we were given eventually. It took a long time to get a baggy green. Originally, we just had this silly old cap. And so we did play with baggy green. But then she went off and just got us this, lovely bag. And so things like that are sort of coming back as they're trying to say, well, there's a really strong history here and let's recognise it, all the people who are involved with it. So this is about 2 months old that, she got that for us. So that was all the West Australian players who represented Australia in Test cricket. And, it's not many, it's only 13 from Western Australia played for Australia in Test match cricket. So that's pretty nice.
Retrospectively, we were given baggy greens and a number. So that was done since it's become part of the men's, since it's grown in popularity, publicity, whatever the word is. We were given retrospectively baggy greens, which I have up on my wall at home. Blazers and uniforms and stuff like that, I haven't got that. But, we were given baggy greens and a number. And that probably means as much as any memorabilia, baggy green. So, no, I think that was really good.
Some of them today, like Mary says, I wish I could be out there now, paid to play. That could be my job, fantastic. But I think we just sat back and said, it's been a long, hard road. But to see this is what, it was my dream, definitely. I wanted it to be a family game, a game that everyone would come to see, and we'd achieved it, and that the players get their recognition now. Like, they used to just come back into the country and you'd be lucky if anybody acknowledged them or took their photo or anything,
Great sentiments there from Anne Mitchell, and those baggy greens are fitting accolades for Annette and Karen. They both graced the game and were part of a 5-match Test series at its finest, seesawing from team to team and keeping the result alive until the final day. Tense run chases, low-scoring thrillers, Australia with the spoils after being 1 down with 2 to play. It's why we love the game, isn't it? And do you know what? I'm with Anne Mitchell.
Anything between Australia and England is known as the Ashes, so you might as well go with the flow.
If you've enjoyed this episode, there's plenty more content to explore and enjoy. I'll put the full interview with Karen Reid on the YouTube channel. Search for Once Upon a Time in the Ashes and look out for clips, photos and press cuttings on my Twitter, Facebook and Instagram pages, and on the website onceuponatimeintheashes.com. A big thank you to Annette Fellows, Anne Mitchell and Karen Reid for their memories and guiding us through this incredible series and their trailblazing careers. The best of times. The CEO of Papua New Guinea Cricket awaits you on the next episode. Until then, I've been Graham Barrett, and this has been Once Upon a Time in the Ashes.